Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for our 30th episode of YCP's virtual monthly series. We call it Refiner's Fire. Every month, as many of you know who have been joining us for a while now, we bring on Catholic business leaders across every industry to share their professional and spiritual wisdom with us in these short 30-minute live sessions. In spite of those short sessions, we seek to keep it abundantly practical so that we can have new things to try as we go out to better work and witness for Christ. Many of you also know this named series, Refiner's Fire, comes from Scripture, from the book of Malachi, where we learn that God is like a refiner's fire who seeks to purify us and make us the best that we can be. And that really is the whole point of this series, that through the inspiration and wisdom of these exceptional Catholic leaders, we're challenged to make small changes in our lives, improvements in our lives, so that let's be open to this journey of refinement, this chance to be as excellent in our lives as we can be, knowing that there's this higher standard of excellence that we're called to in God's eyes. So I'm very excited today. Our topic is going to be on motivation mastery, conquering workplace slumps. So we're going to talk about some of the common challenges of lacking motivation in the workplace. This is a hurdle we know many of us experience in our professional lives and even just more broadly in our personal lives. We're going to talk about some strategies to conquer this obstacle so that we can have greater productivity and success while also embracing the purpose and the path that God has put us on in our lives. So I'm very excited to introduce today Sam Guzman. Sam's a psychotherapist, an author and a founder of the Catholic Gentleman, who I'm sure many of you follow closely and have been watching for many years now. He now practices therapy full-time in Oklahoma, where he lives with his wife and his 5 children. Sam, welcome to the show. We're so glad you could join us. Sorry, Sam, I think we're muted. We're going to get you unmuted here so we can hear you.
I just said thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we'll kind of get right to it here, Sam. I thought since many people here may know your work, but some may not, you could give us just a little bit of context here. Who are you? You know, how did you come to start the Catholic Gentleman and building that content that you've been sharing for men for so many years now? And then we'll get into some of our questions around this topic.
Yeah, it's a long journey, and I'll keep it brief. But basically, I was a young convert to the Catholic Church about 10 years ago, exactly. And I was trying to find out myself as a man. I was a young father, young husband, and still felt like I had a lot of open-ended questions about what it meant to be a man. And during one of these, I was preparing for consecration to Our Blessed Mother, using a novena kind of from St. Maximilian Kolbe, and it was right in the middle of that where I received really a very clear inspiration for a website for Catholic men called the Catholic Gentleman. You could even see like the logo in my head and everything. So I just ran over to a computer, threw up a site on a free website builder, and the rest is history, as they say. But I really feel like it came out of Our Blessed Mother's care for her sons. And really the mission is quite simple, kind of summarized in the motto, be a man, be a saint. But why the 2 parts? One is because grace perfects nature. And I think we have to learn how to be men before we can learn how to be saints. And if you reverse that order or you ignore the natural level of virtue, I think things can go awry very quickly. And so I think we're called to be healthy human beings, healthy men. And then grace perfects that natural vocation to masculinity, and takes us to a whole nother level, a supernatural level, where we can radiate God's love wherever we go. So that's really the mission in a nutshell, is to equip men to do that.
Awesome. I love it. We talk here at YCP a lot about making modern day saints. So I think there's a lot of alignment here on our spiritual journeys. Well, let's talk a little bit about this topic, why this topic is important to you, and what you hope our audience will be able to kind of take away from this conversation today.
Yeah, well, it's important to me because I've experienced the struggle. I certainly have, found it hard at times to engage with the tasks in front of me. And some of that is perhaps my personality, but some of it is also just the challenges that come with the modern workplace, where we often nowadays are working from home. We're in front of screens for many hours each day, in a lot of jobs anyway. And that brings with it some unique challenges that perhaps people didn't face in the past. So it's something I've definitely struggled with, and something that I've put a lot of thought into, and kind of striving to overcome that in my own personal life.
So let's talk a little bit, particularly to young Catholic workers,
Yeah.
YCP's main audience, right? Because it's certainly an important um, topic to address for just professionals in general. What do you think is particular to the experience of a young worker today as it pertains to motivation in the workplace?
Yes, well, I think a big part of it is millennials and younger. What is it, Gen Z now or something like that? Where a lot of us crave purpose and meaning, and we want to work for companies that have a clear purpose and direction. And if we don't have that, we struggle. So, just to break it down a little bit, like if you're just selling widgets, that's kind of hard for millennials to get excited about, just being perfectly honest. But if it's like selling widgets in order to change someone's life in a positive way, in order to be a part of some bigger mission, oh man, we'll get on board with that any day of the week. The problem with that is when you're in the day to day with the tasks of actually producing content, of actually working on projects, meeting deadlines, things like that. It's so easy to get bogged down and lose sight of that purpose. And so I think that's a unique struggle of modern workers. I also mentioned young Catholic professionals like struggling with being in front of screens today. Pretty much any white collar job, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a marketer, advertiser, somewhere in between, you're going to probably be sitting in the front of the screen for hours and hours a day. And if you work from home, you're going to have very limited social contact and things like that. And yeah, there's Zoom meetings and things like that, but it's not the same as like chatting over the water cooler, kind of the stereotypical office environment, which has kind of been the butt of jokes. But at the same time, there's a human touch there that gets lost sometimes. So all of those things are factors that make it challenging for modern workers, and I think it can decrease our motivation, our level of motivation. The last thing I'll say is tangible results. If you're a mechanic, a car is broken, and when it leaves your shop, it's fixed. It's very easy to see the tangible results. But like, let's say you're a digital marketer and you're just pumping out, graphics all day long, or writing ad copy all day long and things like that. The results just feel really ephemeral. They just feel very intangible, and that can be kind of dissatisfying. Not to say that it is pointless; it's not. But for the person doing the work, it can often be lost. Like it's just not the same seeing some metric or something as it is, actually doing something hands-on and having those tangible results. So I think those are all challenges that we face kind of as modern young professionals.
And just to connect the dots here for everyone listening, I imagine that this is not just your own personal experience, but also what you're often hearing in your conversations as a psychotherapist. Would you say that's the case?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a struggle. It's a universal struggle. There's a saying in therapy that what's most personal is often most universal. And often we find that when we enter into these struggles and we think that we're alone, we're the only one feeling this way, and then we start talking to some other people and we realize that a lot of other people feel this way too. So it is a very common struggle today.
Yeah, I think that commonality is important to know we're not struggling alone, right? And that many others, if not all of us, struggle with this challenge of keeping a high level of motivation in the work that we do. Um, let's talk a little bit about just from a generational perspective. In your work, do you believe that young people today struggle more with a lack of motivation than perhaps past generations?
Yeah, I do. I think part of that is due to our affluent society. I think a lot of times in the past, people often were just concerned with strictly survival. I mean, a coal miner didn't really have a lot of time to worry about meaning and purpose in his job. He just needed to put food on the table, and he would do whatever it took to achieve that. But it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like at the bottom, there's that level of um, survival, of just food and water, shelter, like those basic survival needs. Once those are met, then there's a next rung up, and so on, until you get to this level of meaning and purpose. And that's not to say that people aren't worried about survival now, but let's be honest, like a lot of those basic needs in our modern developed American society are met. And so then we have other questions after that we start asking, like, what is the meaning of my life? What is the purpose of this job beyond putting food on the table? And the other factor there is we always have options, like in this modern, marketplace. And that's why you see millennials changing jobs a lot, because they get restless, they get dissatisfied with one job, and they move on to the next. And in the old days, so to speak, we'd work one job for 40 years and you'd retire. Now it's more complicated than that, because companies also aren't as invested in their workers as they used to be. You don't get that golden parachute, that retirement plan, that pension that workers used to look forward to. A lot of companies are like they lay you off, they replace you very easily. And so there's kind of this like mercenary attitude, but it raises those questions of like, if I'm not feeling satisfied in this job, if I'm feeling restless, if I'm feeling bored, I'm feeling resistance, I'll just go look for another job. And that's something that a lot of people didn't used to have the option to do. So I think those are all, again, just factors that are kind of unique to the modern world, where you can just jump on Indeed.com, browse, explore your options, see who's got the better deal. And it unfortunately has the unintended effect of often creating a restlessness or a dissatisfaction that might not otherwise be there. It's just kind of a factor of modern marketplace.
Good. I want to dig into that a little bit, but just a reminder for our audience here, we're going to be taking questions from you soon. So go ahead and prepare those questions. You can actually start submitting those in the comments section if you're on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll start to pull from those here in a few minutes with Sam to continue the conversation. So Sam, I think it's good for us to shift here now that we've laid a little bit of groundwork to better talk about how we kind of address this in a practical way head on. So we know motivation is a lack of motivation is happening to many. We know there's some societal and cultural reasons. There's just some, where we are in time, moment in time reasons that we're experiencing this. So when the rubber meets the road, right, we're feeling a sense that there's some dissatisfaction, there's some lack of motivation in our work. How would you suggest that we think through that and approach that a little bit more practically?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is, I got three suggestions. One is, as the business guru, Simon Sinek, a lot of you probably are familiar with him, but just start with why, right? Like, why are you in the workforce? What is your purpose? And Saint Josemaria Escriva is so wonderful on this. Like, he really gets you to think about why. And he talks about the purpose. So I would encourage you guys to just check out some of his books, like The Way, The Furrow, The Forge, like some of those books, because he really gets into this about living holiness in the workplace. But as Catholics, we have a deeper purpose than just making money. Obviously, that's a factor. But dig a little deeper, find that why. Like, why has God called you to this specific profession? Maybe it's just a step in your career development. That's fine. That's fair. But is there something deeper there that you can tap into? And that has so much to do with motivation. The Japanese have that ikigai, or I think, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but they have this Venn diagram of like what you're good at, what you love to do, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And if you can think through those questions, you'll probably find your why pretty quickly. So anyway, dig a little deeper, find your why. That's key to motivation. Any motivation, whether it's running a marathon or getting motivated at work, is finding your purpose. Why are you doing this? And if you can't answer that question, you're probably going to lose motivation pretty quickly. Number two, I would suggest listening to the resistance. What is it trying to say? Oftentimes when we have internal forces at work in our soul, there's something else going on. It's not just that you're lazy or whatever. So what does that mean? Well, are there psychological, spiritual, emotional needs that aren't being met? Is your employer simply not paying you enough? Does it go back to some childhood trauma? So don't underestimate this. For example, I've often heard that people who had extremely hard, strict, uh, unfeeling fathers that would humiliate them when they made mistakes and didn't allow them to grow and explore safely often find it very hard. The fear of being humiliated, the fear of making a mistake is so high that an internal part of them is saying it's safer to not even start. It's safer to not even start because the chance of failure is so scary. So there can be deeper roots to lack of motivation there, but also maybe you're just burned out physically. Maybe you're just not taking care of your physical organism and you're burned out. And that kind of leads to the next question. The next last point I want to make is Sabbath rest. Don't underestimate this. God set up the template in Genesis where you work for 6 days, but then you rest. Now, that applies to your work week, yes, but it also applies to your work day. Are you setting aside a zone of rest and rejuvenation? And I could go off on all kinds of rabbit trails about your nervous system and things like that. But the point is, we need rest. We need um, moments to pause, breathe, move our bodies, things like that. And if you're not doing that, your brain's going to melt down at some point and it's going to say, no more. I can't do anymore, which is what we experience as lack of motivation. So balance interiority with exteriority. You're putting out energy. You also have to replenish energy, just like a battery. And so balance that. Sometimes sitting in front of a screen, you've got to just get up and move. Take a walk, do some stretches, something like, and get that blood flowing. Your physical organism matters so much. But find those zones of rest and silence and rejuvenate your inner being as well as your physical being. Absolutely essential. And if you don't do it, you're going to burn out and you're going to lose motivation.
Yeah, and studies of the brain, our understanding of the brain have pretty clearly shown that rest from the brain's perspective doesn't happen when we're in front of a screen, right? Even if we're not actively working on work, if we're in front of a screen, be it a cell phone or a TV or a computer screen, the brain is not at rest, right? So
Right.
Just to debunk that up front, yeah, I think those are really, really good tips, starting with why, listening to the resistance, and then really taking seriously our rest, especially as we're called to rest, because of our faith, right? So I think that's so helpful as a starting place for thinking about this lack of motivation. And I love that you brought up Jose Maria. At the end, I'll give a little more of a pitch, but he's going to be the basis for our conference coming up in April, called Laborers in the Vineyard. So for those who may already be really engaged with him as perhaps a patron saint of theirs, you're going to love that. And I think those who may not yet have been exposed to his kind of approach to the spiritual life and living that actively in the world, you're going to want to be there because we're really going to unpack that. So that's great timing. Let's talk in our last minute here before we turn to our audience. Audience, please be typing those questions now. But Sam, let's talk a little bit about how does motivation really impact our opportunity to evangelize? Because we are called to share our faith with others. How does this really relate to this topic in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Jose Maria Escriva, going back to him, one of the things that he says that I think is so beautiful, he just talks about we are called to find the secret in all of our circumstances. And he said I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially he says the secret is love. Love is the ultimate motivator because your will moves towards what it finds attractive, what it loves fundamentally. And so it's like God is on the other side of our work, drawing us toward himself through our work. And if you look at a lot of employees today, it's not about that. It's about the paycheck. It's about the benefits. It's about the time off. And work is just kind of like a nuisance that we have to put up with in order to enjoy the weekend or to enjoy our 2 weeks a year, maybe if we're lucky, that we get off. And that's kind of the way the world looks at work. But as Christians, we have an opportunity to show that there is a deeper layer there. There's a deeper level of motivation for us that the world may not understand. And they may say, how can you go to work with such enthusiasm every day? How can you go to work and not get tired? Like, how do you deal with these customers and not bite their heads off? And like, really, and when that curiosity is sparked, then you have so many opportunities for evangelization, because people say, what do you have that I'm missing? And then that opens the door to a deeper conversation, a deeper level of, we have higher values, higher order level of values that we're striving for. It's like a cross, right? They're all stuck on kind of that horizontal level of just work to get a paycheck, to have fun. And it's like we're like on this vertical level, informed by values from above, not just from our employer. And that makes all the difference. And sparking that curiosity can make a huge, huge difference.
Awesome. I love it. So let's keep the conversation going. I see some questions coming in. So let's take a question here from people listening in. From Allie, what advice do you have when personal outside of work stress is affecting your work performance, especially with all of the conversations about burnout and work-life balance? Thanks, Allie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this goes back to that interiority versus exteriority piece, where your inner life matters and it's very much tied to your physical organism. And practically, what does that mean? That means that, unfortunately, the psychological buzzword, but self-care. Like, you have to take care of yourself in order to be there for others, including your employer. So take time to process those emotions. For example, even journaling. Like, not everybody has to see a therapist, but just journaling is a time-honored tradition. Many of our saints had journals, right? Like Saint Therese, Saint Teresa of Avila, like Saint Francis de Sales. They all like process their interior life through writing. And I could go into a lot of the psychological benefits, but the research shows that wrapping words around your emotions helps reduce their intensity. So I would just take the time in one form or another, whether it's talking with a friend, whether it's journaling, whether it's talking to a professional, but take time to process the emotions. You have to. And Jesus even said, love your neighbor as yourself. And to the extent that you are neglecting yourself, you're probably going to be neglecting your employer, your job, those around you, and not being able to love them fully. And lastly, I'll just say, take care of your physical body. It absolutely matters. It's not an accidental thing, even to your interior life. Because if you're exhausted physically, depleted physically, you're not going to be able to pray the way you need to. You're not going to be able to look inward the way you need to. Like, there's going to be resistance to that. So all that to say, take care of yourself, process those emotions, move your body. It has psychological, spiritual, emotional benefits, and it will translate to your work life.
Awesome. Let's take another question. From Isabella, what are some books you recommend to read related to this topic of a lack of motivation and how to overcome this obstacle? Maybe if you could remind us, I think about a couple of the books from St. Jose Maria Escriva that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, The Way, The Furrow, The Forge, they're like little pocket-sized books. There's a series of them, but they're really just like little snippets. They're not like read cover to cover kind of books. There's like a quote almost from him, from one of his letters or sermons or things like that. Super easy and digestible. So those are awesome. Simon Sinek actually does have a book about motivation from a secular perspective, about that start with why question. So that might be one you want to look up. But yeah, I think those are really big. But honestly, I don't have a big, long laundry list of books, but I would start with those and really internalize them, digest them, read them slowly, and see what that can do for you. And if that's not enough, then dig deeper. But I think just starting simple and really interiorizing what these saints are saying Not Simon Sinek, he's not a saint, but Saint Rosalie is saying. Also, Saint Francis
Yeah.
de Sales is really good on this. So
Yeah, that's awesome. You're doing a laundry list of our last handful of conferences. Saint Therese, Saint Francis de Sales. These saints come up for a reason all the time.
yes,
And they're
right?
doctors of the church for a reason, right? I love it. Yeah, and as much reading and ingesting content, you also have to be reflecting on that, right? I mean, you have to have that silence and that time to just reflect, because someone's not going to be able to just hand you the answer, even if they're a quote unquote expert, right?
Right, and there's a difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. It's like reading one quote and letting it sink deep into your soul can have a huge impact compared to reading tons of books that just bounce off your brain, but don't really sink into your soul. So it's much better to savor something deep and profound, which all the writings of our saints are, and interiorize that than it is to read all the hot 100 books on Amazon.com and it just has no impact on you. So
Yeah, I love that. Good. Let's take another question. From Nicholas, do you have any recommendations for incorporating prayer as part of the Sabbath rest you mentioned in your daily work? How do you do this? What specific prayers have you found useful? Thanks, Nicholas.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I would just say don't overcomplicate it because prayer is actually quite simple. It's just a heart-to-heart relationship with God. That can be as simple as kind of an interior conversation with God on the way to work. But I would say find something that you find a non-negotiable, whether that's a daily rosary, whether that's morning and evening prayer from the liturgy of the hours, whether that's something as simple as the Jesus prayer from Eastern Catholicism, Eastern Christianity, of Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. Like that's a time-honored prayer that goes back to the beginning of earliest centuries of Christianity, and you can say that anytime, anywhere, and kind of make an interior connection with God. It's kind of like sparks from a coal, right? Like we're just sending up little acts of love throughout the day, but it's really facilitated and helped by finding a simple prayer, even if it's just a morning offering, even if it's St. Pius X's prayer before work, which is a beautiful, beautiful prayer I would recommend to everyone. But find one little thing and keep it consistent. Consistency is much more powerful than big concerted efforts. So just look for something simple that you can do every day, and then anything that you can add to that is just awesome. It's bonus, but stick to that one prayer practice every day. Short, simple. If you have time for a rosary, do a rosary. If you only have time for a decade, do a decade, but keep it consistent. Consistency is power. One thing said consistently is more powerful than 50 things done sporadically. So just keep that in mind.
And I would just add to that list of recommendations, Sam. This actually comes from one of our past conference speakers, one of the Sisters of Life, and she talked about how rather than being in a moment at work where we have to make a decision and saying, God, what are you calling me to do? Which is good, right? And is worthy of us asking as a way to pray. We could say, God, what are we going to do? You and me. Right now, in this moment, when I'm going into this presentation, or I have to send this tough email, or I have to have a difficult conversation, or I feel unmotivated, what are we going to do about this together? And what are you calling me to do in this moment, knowing you're here sitting beside me, or here, however you like to picture how you're interacting with God when you're in conversation. Perhaps something to consider as well.
Yeah, I love
excellent. That. Well, we're at the end of our time here, Sam. Would love just one final thought. I mean, what would you leave us with as it pertains to this topic and today's conversation as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say the interior gives energy and motivation to the exterior. So St. Benedict's Ora et Labora is a template for all of us. And even though the external work may be a higher proportion than the interior work, it's still absolutely motivated and given power by the interior work that we embrace. So learn to connect with yourself, to listen to your emotions, to listen to your body, to listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit deep in your soul, which can only be done through periods of silence. But even a few minutes of that, even a drop of that, will give renewed energy, enthusiasm, zeal to your external work, and will bring clarity to a lot of those practical questions that all of you are asking. I wish we had time to engage in that, but don't underestimate the power of turning inward, even for a few minutes a day. Even for 1 minute a day is better than nothing. So look inward, find the interior disposition, ultimately of love for God, which will then facilitate and give energy to love for neighbor. And your employer is your neighbor. Your coworkers are your neighbor. So love them well, and God will take care of the rest.
Amen. I love it. Thank you, Sam, so much. We're thrilled to have had you on the show today and look forward to staying in touch with you. So thanks so much, and thanks to everyone joining us today.